G'day guys, I'm finally here. Selection number one, the best ever, 1986 through to 2021. I don't know, those of you who've been following this, I don't need to explain exactly what I'm doing here. If you're new here, please go back through the other videos in this series. There are 9 other videos. This is the 10th. Okay, and that will explain everything. I want to get stuck into this selection number one. And you will remember that, as we always do with this selection number one, there's a lot of hype around this pick. So whether they are a not so notable, a notable mention, or a newbie, everyone remembers the number one draft pick. So we're going to start with the not so notables. We're going to go right back to 1987. And Ruckman David Launder from Central Districts in the Sandford went to the Richmond Football Club. He actually kicked 4 goals on debut against the Kangaroos, and that, in the end, was a career highlight for him. His next 3 games were average, to say the least, and did not play another game in the VFL AFL, and ended up only playing 4 games and kicked 5 goals and returned to South Australia. 1989, another player that went to Richmond, Anthony Bannick. I did not realise this until I did some research, but he actually suffered from chronic fatigue syndrome, the same thing that Alistair Lynch suffered from in his time at the Brisbane Lions. Ended up only playing 49 games for the Tigers, and in that season in 1994, after coming back from chronic fatigue syndrome, he actually won the Richmond Reserves Best and Fairest, but was delisted at the end of that year. 1990, another Western Australian sort of ruckman come forward, probably more forward, is Stephen Hooper. Went to the Cats, 21 games, just forgettable games really in 2 seasons. Asked Geelong supporters about Stephen Hooper. Not overly impressive. 1991, the helmeted. Wore a helmet, WA boy again. Played full forward, but he wasn't a big full forward. More your sort of leading type. He actually kicked 3 bags of 8 goals in his career. He started off at Brisbane, then went to Sydney, and then ended up at Fremantle. He kicked a goal, but he was inconsistent. 36 games, 79 goals. And the final, not so notable, I'm chucking him in. He didn't play 100 games. And he was, look, whatever issues, and we know he had ACL concerns. He had a couple of ACLs early in his career, and he never got a great run at it. But, I don't know, there was just something about Jonathan Patton. On his day, powerful forward, but 89 games, 130 goals as a big, powerful number one draft pick's probably a not so notable. Most of those games and goals came to the Giants. Went to the Hawks, played 6 games there and only kicked 3 goals. And in January 2021, Jonathan Patton was stood down by the Hawthorn Football Club for inappropriate behaviour, sort of a little bit Josh Bootsma areas here, after accusations were made that he inappropriately sent sexual images to several women over social media. Goodness gracious me. Patton retired from football on the 16th of April 2021, citing mental health issues. Let's get to the notable mentions now. Okay, and there's plenty of these. All right, and just remember, if you played 100 games, you sort of, I've decided you fall into this category. Also, if you haven't played 100 games but you've done something extraordinary, then you probably fall into this category as well. Okay, so 1986, the first ever draft, Martin Leslie, and I remember he was tough. He was as tough as is it tough? No, as hard as a duck's beak. He was fierce, really fierce. South Australian, ended up at the Brisbane Bears. In fact, when he was first drafted, he decided to stay in South Australia and didn't come to the Lions or the Bears until 1988. Okay, so he made his debut at the age of 26. So he was a mature body. Ended up playing 107 games for the Brisbane Bears as that hard-nosed, aggressive, tough defender. He won the Bears Best and Fairest, and they weren't great then. They weren't great. But it's a fairest effort at any club to win a best and fairest. He won that award in 1990. In fact, he tied for that award with David Bain. Remember that name? David Bain. 1988, Ballarat boy Alex McDonald. He had a brother who also played, a younger brother who played a lot of really good football, really good sort of leader for Melbourne, then the Giants. He was picked by the Hawks with the number 1 draft pick. Never really set the world on fire. He was serviceable. 46 games for Hawthorn, then a further 61 games when he was traded to the Collingwood Football Club. He played 107 games overall, which was the same amount as Martin Leslie. 1992, the unheralded Drew Banfield notched up 265 AFL games for the West Coast Eagles, and has the great honour of being the only player, the West Coast Eagles, to appear in both the 1994, and it's a big gap, that's a huge gap, the 1994 Premiership win, and then again in the 2006 Premiership teams. He was a best and fairest winner in 1996. The somewhat, at times, I don't know, he was a little bit awkward kicking style, but he was dashing. He had the mop of curly hair. His name was Darren Gaspar. He was drafted to initially Sydney, where he played 21 games for the Swans, wanted to go to Richmond, and that's where he made his name as I suppose, a dashing fullback. He could play one-on-one, won 2 best and fairest. In fact, he won 1 best and fairest of the Tigers, but played some really good football as a fullback and won 2 All-Australian awards. 1994, mobile ruckman, really mobile. Jeff White, Victorian boy who was drafted to the Fremantle Football Club, 32 games for the Dockers, wanted to come home and found a home at the Melbourne Football Club where he put together a really, really good career. 236 games for the Ds, 268 games overall. All-Australian in 2004 as a ruckman and won the best and fairest for Melbourne in 2004. I'm pretty sure he was part of that really good period for Melbourne where they made a grand final in 2000, but unfortunately they were smashed by the Essendon Football Club. 1995, definitely a cult hero. Something about Clive Waterhouse. Port Adelaide, Sample, went to Fremantle. Mop of hair, flashy, in and out of the game. Just, I don't know, just the look of him. He was inconsistent, but on his day, he was electrifying as that sort of half forward. He can pitch into the middle, but he was the type of player that you just knew didn't have an engine. It was all based on power. 106 games, 178 goals. And I didn't actually realise this, that Clive Waterhouse was born in London, didn't come to Australia until he was maybe 8 or 9, and played soccer right up until the age of 17. So he was a late comer to the game of Aussie rules. 1996, a little bit of controversy about this bloke, Michael Gardner, another mobile type ruckman, but also a fraction awkward in the way he ran, and even the way he kicked the ball. But could have a day out. West Coast Eagles won 29 games and 87 goals, All-Australian in 2003, part of the losing 2005 Premiership team. Then missed out on the win in 2006. He could play forward, but really Dean Cox pushed him out, really, and didn't feature in that 2006 grand final. Off-field issues led him to the Victoria, pushed him out. I think the Eagles were happy to see the back of him, to be honest. Went to the Saints, and he played some good footy there at St Kilda. 52 games, part of the losing grand finals under Ross Lyon in 2009 and 2010. All up, he played 181 games. 1997, another player I'm pretty sure wore a helmet. I don't know whether he wore it for his entire career, but he definitely wore it when he was at Brisbane, and that is Travis Johnson. Originally Melbourne, where he played 209 games and won a best and fairest there in 2005. On his day, just a damaging midfielder. Ball magnet, beautiful vision, great skills. Really good to watch, but just a little bit inconsistent. Went to the Lions and reinvented himself there as a high accumulating, dashing, skillful sort of half-back flanker, and played some good footy there as well. 1998, another enigma is somewhat. This is like a trend about these number one draft picks. That's Des Headland. Originally Brisbane, went to Fremantle, played in Brisbane's second grand final of that replay, which was 2002. Played well, but then decided to go, I think it was home. I think WA was home. And he ended up at Fremantle, where he put together, over 100 games for the Dockers. All up, he played 166 games and kicked 177 goals and was a premiership player, obviously, for Brisbane. 1999, I think somewhat maligned in his time at Collingwood and definitely externally, didn't quite live up to the hype of his number one draft pick, but still put together 200 games at the one club, and that's Josh Fraser. Sort of, I don't know, it's almost like he was not quite big and strong enough to be that real number one ruckman, but could play that role, and not quite good enough to be a damaging forward, which he could play that role as well. So in this day and age, he could be that classic second ruckman. But at the time, it wasn't quite in vogue. But, ended up at the Gold Coast Suns in their early days where he played 18 games. So that's 218 games. And he played in those great grand finals, particularly the first one against the Brisbane Lions at Collingwood, that 2002 grand final. And he played well, but he was part of those two losing teams, and then lost his spot, the number one ruck spot when the Pies got Darren Jolly to the football club in 2010. And they changed the way they play. They got Jolly in. He's a really, really experienced and clever and crafty ruckman. And it meant Josh Fraser missed out on that 2010 grand final. 2000, absolute legend of St Kilda and a great player for many, many years, and a pleasure to watch. Very, very consistent. I'm pretty sure he missed all of his debut year, and that's Nick Riewoldt I'm talking about. He didn't make his debut at the St Kilda Football Club until his second season. I can't remember the exact issue, but an injury, was it a knee injury that kept him out? And the Saints won back-to-back Rising Star wins. They had Justin Kaczynski won it. Okay, and then Nick Riewoldt won it the following year. So he was a Rising Star in 2002. He ended up playing 336 games and kicked 718 goals to be arguably the greatest Saint of all time. Am I jumping the gun there? Darryl Baldock was pretty good. But anyway, he's an all-time great. Captain for 11 seasons, 6 Best and Fairest, Lee Matthews Trophy in 2004, 5 All-Australian awards for Nick Riewoldt, 2 losing grand finals. That's the one that hurts him, I reckon, when you put together that resume and you lose 2 grand finals. And he didn't play well in them. He did not really play well in them. Or he didn't have an impact, So 2009, 2010, those famous grand finals, they were famous. Against the Cats, then the Pies. 2002, another player drafted to the St Kilda Football Club and should have been at Carlton. Like Daniel Wells, Carlton had picks number 1 and number 2 in 2002, but they were taken off them. Brendan Goddard, who was a Carlton supporter, went to the Saints, then to the Bombers. 334 games of AFL football, 205 games for the Saints, and now is a life member of the Essendon Football Club. Played 129 games for the Bombers. He was a 2-time All-Australian. Both of those at St Kilda, won a Best and Fairest when he went to Essendon in his first year and was their captain in a really dark time of the Essendon Football Club. A lot was thrust on Brendan Goddard when he first went there. That was 2016. And like Riewoldt, played in the Saints losing 2009 and 2010 grand finals teams, and he was superb in that 2010 grand final, the drawn grand final. He turned the game with Lenny Hayes in that game, and who could forget his mark in the last quarter. 2003, Adam Cooney, another somewhat of an enigma, but on his day, so damaging, won a Brownlow medal, as we know, in 2008. That was the year, All-Australian in that year as well. But pretty much that was it in regards to accolades. 250 games is good, 202 goals. He was a midfielder that could kick a sausage roll. Most of those games came at the Dogs, and he left because he was cooked and went to the Bombers. And he was cooked there, but got games really because they were struggling. And there were spots up to grab. So on his day, damaging. 2004, Brett Delidio, tragic story really when you think about what happened to Delidio. Made the decision to leave the football club to go to the Giants and left on the eve of one of the great dynasties of the football club when they won 3 premierships in 4 years. Really good player at Richmond, played 275 games overall, 197 goals for both Richmond and the Giants, but most of those games came at the Tigers, where he was the AFL Rising Star winner in 2005, a couple of All-Australians and a couple of best and fairnesses at Richmond, and just the 32 games at the Giants, and had to watch his former teammate win that 2017 grand final. 2005, Mark Murphy, unfortunately maligned at his football club for the second probably half of his career, but linked over the line to 300 games, but the first half of his career was just quality. But his body caught up with him. The game caught up with him. So 300 games, retired on 300, 197 goals, couple of best and fairest, All-Australian in 2011, in a super year for Mark Murphy. In the same year, he was voted the AFL Coaches Association Champion Player of the Year, and as I mentioned, captain of the club in really, really dark times, tough times, 2013 through 2018. This was a run of 3 number 1 draft picks to the Carlton Football Club. The following year, they grabbed Bryce Gibbs from Glenelg in South Australia. He was always going number 1, regardless of what anyone says. I think anyone who had the number 1 pick were always going to take Bryce Gibbs, and we know that Joel Selwood was taken with pick 7, and he's probably the best ever. But Gibbs was good at the Blues. You know, he's played 231 games for Carlton, including a best and fairest in 2014. And the much publicised move to Adelaide didn't happen when he first wanted to go. He remained at Carlton, where he kept his head up high and played exceptional football in his last year at Carlton. And then the deal was done, and it just didn't work out at Adelaide. For whatever reason, not going to go into it, only played 37 games at the Crows. And I reckon he probably retired prematurely, Bryce Gibbs. Blues then went for Matthew Cruiser. So 2 midfielders into a ruckman, could play forward. So, yeah, maybe a little bit similar to Josh Frazier in regards to his height, but he was very, very mobile, but was dogged by injuries right the way through his career. ACL, remember that game against Fremantle, also missed a chunk of footy with his knee then, just couldn't get his feet right. You know, it was feet issues, and missed a lot of footy. Won 89 games in the end for Matthew Cruiser and kicked 94 goals. He was a super player on his day. Jack Watts, you know, for whatever reason, and I think, you know, you watch the guy play, he just wasn't quite a key position player, did not put weight on. Issues around his real commitment to the game. Did he have the temperament to be an AFL footballer? He was certainly thrust into a really poor Melbourne side in his early days. I remember that game in the Queen's birthday, played him in his debut, and Collingwood just went after him. They went after him, you know, Heath Shaw and the like just bullied the hell out of him. And I don't know whether that affected him, but played 174 games, he kicked 161 goals. Most of those for the D's. He was forward, then went back. They experimented with him. Then he played his best football in his second stint as a forward. Ended up at Port Adelaide as well. It didn't quite work out for him there. Although he did play some reasonable games early in his time at Alberton. But there was some issues off field with Jack Watts as well. Tom Scully. Left Melbourne after 2 years, was tracking okay there, you know, ball magnet, running machine, 31 games in 2 seasons with the D's. I think he read the writing on the wall, and he was offered big money to go to the Giants. 6-year contract, reportedly worth, you know, over $6 million. There was a controversy of his old man being offered a job as well by the GWS as a recruiting officer, which was somewhat laughable at the time. He played okay footy there, but I don't think he was worth that money, and definitely not a number one draft pick sort of quality. Overall, he's played 170 games for Melbourne, most of those for the Giants, and then he went to Hawthorn as a salary dump. I think it was a salary dump. The Giants wanted him off their books, and 35 games for the Hawks. And I think he sort of retired somewhat prematurely. He had some ankle concerns and never could quite get right. Let's go to 2010 and David Swallow, another player who exceptional leadership qualities and pretty hard and pretty tough. But, I just don't think the silk of a number one draft pick. He's won 97 games and still going. He'll get over the line for 200. I don't know whether he's necessarily in their future plans, but he should get to the 200. He's currently the Gold Coast Suns games record holder, and overall he's played the 197 games, as I said, captain between 2009 and 2021, and won the Suns Best and Fairest in 2014. 2012. Running machine, exquisitely skilled off a halfback flank on both sides of the body. Lockie Whitfield, Victorian, Dandenong Stingrays, went to the Giants, won 72 games thus far. All-Australian in 2018 and two-time Best and Fairest winner. But I've got to mention this. We all remember it. 2016, Whitfield was suspended for 6 months for bringing the game into disrepute for taking illicit drugs and then attempting to evade drug testing. At the time, under the guidance of Greater Western Sydney administrators Graham Allen and Craig Lambert, it was like a really, really comical, laughable situation where he was like dodging and weaving and trying to elude the drug testing people. It was quite funny. 2013, Tom Boyd. I'll put him in the notable mentions because his performance on grand final day for the Dogs in 2016 should have been the Norm Smith medalist. 4 goals and just dominated in the air. It was a great game. It was a memorable performance by a bloke who left the Giants. He spent a couple of years there. 61 games, 50 goals, and that premiership in 2016. And unfortunately for footy, really, he announced his retirement at the tender age of 23 due to mental health issues as well. 2014, Paddy McCartan. I'll put him into the notable mentions because his career is still going. It's been resurrected. And I think he'll track if he can keep healthy in regards to his body and his mind. I think he'll play over 100 games of AFL football. He's reinvented himself as a really good defender with his younger brother Tom at Sydney. 35 games for the Saints. We know his concussion issues. Spent a lot of time away from football. Got a chance with Sydney. Played in that losing grand final this year. But is tracking very well under the tutelage of John Longmire. At the Swans. 2015, Jacob Wiedering, Carlton, won 33 games thus far. Won the Blues Best and Fairest in 2020. He's been in the All-Australian squad on a couple of occasions now. Will he make it? As a key back in the All-Australian, just to start to build that resume? He's currently the vice-captain of the football club. In 2016, Andrew McGrath, Essendon, won the Rising Star in 2017. Started off as a sort of a dashing back pocket player who could find the pill. Trialled in the midfield, somewhat underwhelming in that role. Had some good games there, but the word is now under under Brad Scott, the new coach of the Essendon Football Club, that Andrew McGrath, the former number one draft pick from 2016, is going to go back to that position in the back half. So, he's played 111 games. Newbies, Cam Rayner, I'm chucking him in there. He probably would have played 100 games had it not been for that ACL injury. 87 games and 81 goals. There's a bit of a trend there, sort of Clyde Waterhouse sort of areas. Not a midfielder. He's a forward, can go pinch hit, but will never be a midfielder on his own, but he can be damaging. Sam Walsh, 81 games so far for Sam Walsh. starting to creep up a few injuries. He was injury-free in his first few years, but, he's had some sort of, there's a back issue at the moment, and we sort of know about the syndesmosis injury. So that's starting to creep into his game, but he was a Rising Star winner, and already, he's an All-Australian in 2021. And won the Blues Best and Fairest in 2021 as well. Matty Rowell, who exploded on the scene, exploded. He just looked like he was going to take the competition by storm. But then had that dislocated shoulder in his first year, missed a chunk of football, then some knee issues as well. Just the 39 games. Seems to be back on track now, but is he as effective as what he was when he first started? He's definitely a hard footballer who can run. We're just going to have to wait and see on that. 2020, Jamara Ugle-Hagan, Western Bulldogs, took him an eternity. There was a little bit of cat and mouse with Luke Beveridge in playing him in his debut season. Didn't make his debut until round 17. He has now played 17-odd games and kicked 22 goals. It's just starting to show a little bit, in that front half of the Western Bulldogs. And 2021, the much publicised and somewhat controversial Jason Horne-Francis already in his career. 1 year at the North Melbourne Football Club, and already he is gone. And I think this is potentially one of the biggest stories of 2023, and that is the watch on Jason Horne-Francis and his new football club in his home state. 17 games at the Kangaroos. Okay, drum roll. Definitely a toss-up. And I don't know. 1 minute I was thinking Nick Riewoldt, and I had him penciled down. But in the end, whatever reason, I just couldn't split them. And I know they play completely different positions, and you can make an argument that being a key forward is a little bit more difficult than being a midfielder, come half-back flanker. And but just given the team success and the leadership qualities all sort of putting together, and he was a bloody good player too. Let's not underestimate what a good player this bloke was. In a time where they were really building, he had a great coach, obviously, to guide him through all that. The best ever pick number one in the history of the AFL between 1990. Start again. Best ever pick, number one pick between 1986 and 2021 is Luke Hodge. Drafted to the Hawthorn Football Club as a somewhat chubby 18-year-old in 2001, he became one of the greats of the Hawthorn Football Club. He played 305 games for the Hawks and kicked 193 goals as a midfielder, high half forward, then one of the great intercepting type halfback flankers where he was just a general and an organiser. He played 41 games for the Lions as well. That's 346 games overall for Luke Hodge. 4 times premiership player. 3 of those were as premiership captain. And what is impressive are the 2 Norm Smith medals he won as well. 3 times he was in the All-Australian team, and he was captain of the Hawthorn Football Club in just a magical period for that club. And he also won 2 Best and Fairest. So the best ever, Luke Hodge. So to top this off, guys, and it's been a pleasure. And please debate as much as you like, but obviously this is my opinion. So far, well, in the end, Dangerfield 10, Pike 9, Bartel 8, Selwood 7, McRae 6, Franklin 5, Pavlich 4, Judd 3, Petrarca 2, Hodge 1. In the end, I reshaped that based on those players, the best. Okay, obviously this is debatable. Really debatable. And in brackets is where they went, obviously. So 10 Pike, 9 McRae, 8 Bartel, 7 Petrarca, 6 Pavlich, 5 Hodge, 4 Dangerfield, 3 Franklin, 2 Judd, and at number 1 is Joel Selwood. tell me what you think. I think it's time for some blues content, which will come shortly. Speak soon, guys.